Mountains are so much more than simple backdrops, they shape the mood, scale and narrative of any landscape. In my artworks, they often take the spotlight, drawing endless curiosity from my Instagram and YouTube followers. How do you create mountains like that? What's your secret? Which tools do you use? In this video, I'll walk you through the tools, techniques and methods I use to craft realistic, stunning mountains in Blender. And one of the easiest way, which I use almost every time to create realistic mountains in Blender, is using a landscape add-on. This is free add-on that is available right in the Blender by default. You just need to enable it. Go to Preferences, Add-ons, and here A.N.T Landscape and activate this add-on. To use this add-on, press Shift-A as usually at some objects in Blender. Mesh, and here we can see Landscape. It already creates such mountains, easy as a piece of cake, right? So we have mesh, and let's take a look at settings which allow us to make more realistic mountains. This add-on has ready-to-use presets, and it's not only mountain, there are different landscape presets like terrain, lakes, dunes and rocks. For mountains we have two different presets, Mountain 1 and Mountain 2, and different settings for each one. First of all, it's subdivision. These parameters make more density to mesh, and this also impacts to detalization of the mountains, as you may see. Also here a lot of settings to experiment with mesh. Maybe the most interesting here is noise type, which allows us to use different types of noise. Some of them are familiar for you. I like noise rock. This one pretty well fit to mountains and creates such a structure. Another settings is random seed, which creates different mountain shapes randomly. If you need some different mountains in the scene, it's just enough to change random seed. Also, we have an opportunity to control the noise size here. So, I'm going with this mountain mesh, and I need more density to get more details on the surface. Some around 600 would be enough, I guess. Yeah, it looks good. Also, you can use the landscape add-on in the Blender sidebar, if it's more useful for you. But in this case, after making some changes, you have to use the regenerate button to apply the new settings. But here we can find another interesting settings in this landscape add-on, which may be necessary for some cases. I'm talking about landscape Eroder. It creates mask for rivers, forest and height mask, masking snow areas and forests. And now we can see a lot of new vertex groups created by landscape add-on. We already have rain map, water and some other other maps that are usually used for landscapes, but we also have to consider that these are vertex groups masks, which means the quality of these masks depends on the mesh density, and we can see that here. So that's why I not often use this method, although sometimes it's necessary to add something like this. For instance, for background mountains I use a different method to cover the mountains with snow and forest. But how to use these vertex groups information? I opened here Shadow Editor and let's add a new material. This one is going to be the first material for the mountain, some rock material, like maybe this. So enable preview render to see this material, and we see nothing because we need to unwrap this mesh. But since this mesh has a pretty dense topology, it may be too complicated to unwrap this model. For such models, I prefer to use another way, it's a box projection method in the texture. Using this way, we don't need to unwrap the model, just need to change the mapping method to object. So change displacement scale and the scale mapping. So yeah, good. I group this material and let's add another one to snow. To add snow we need the masks that we created here in vertex groups. Maybe this one to cover the top part of the mountains. We can't use this information from the vertex groups in the shade editor. We need to convert this one to color attribute and use this color attribute as a mask. It's also absolutely easy to do. Just go to vertex paint, here go to paint, select the necessary vertex group and press vertex color from weight. That's it. We can see that some color attribute was created here. I would rather prefer to rename it to snow. It looks like this, the same that selected vertex group. And now we can use this information in this color attribute node in shade editor. Mix shader to mix two materials. Connect this one, and use this color attribute as a factor in this mix shader node. If we go to preview render, we can see the snow area. Also we can use some other vertex groups. Again, select vertex group, go to vertex paint, create a new color attribute for this new mask, and vertex color from weight. And we may see this in the viewport. And now change color attribute in the shade editor and we have new snow areas on the mountains related to this mask or landscape eroder. We even can use a color ramp to make this snow more visible on the mountains. But as I already said, I prefer to use another way for masking and texturing, and for this way everything that I need is a geometry node in the shade editor to use normal and position in this node for this purpose. Also, I need separate XYZ because I need information only from the Z-axis, and color ramp to control how much snow we need and the area to cover the snow and use this as a factor. As you can see, it creates a much realistic effect of the snow. By the way, there is nothing to prevent us from combination of different approaches. For example, this normal data and erode from landscape add-on use the best way from each method. So, something like this. And this is exactly the same way how I did these mountains in this Blender scene. I used a landscape add-on to create one mountain and a random seed to create variation of these mountains, but basically these are the same mesh. And since this scene is pretty large scene, as you may see, I used 1004 subdivision to get more details on the mesh. This allows us to get more such small details on the light side, which also adds more realism to the art. And what about the material of these mountains? It's also the same which I have shown before. Here is the base rock material, I just grouped everything. Second material for snow, I used the same realistic snow texture from Polygon that I used in my previous video on my channel, and I put the link to this snow texture in the description if you need them. So, as in the previous example, mix everything, and for the mask I used normal Z-axis, and from this data I've got two masks using color ramp. The first one and this one is inverted one. As you may see, these are a little bit different masks. Why do I use two masks? The first one is going to be covered snow part from the top part of the mountains, and the second one is going to be a smooth transition between the top part of the mountain and the part which relates to the bottom ground. For this, I used a gradient texture with a color ramp to shift a little bit this border. Invert this and use as a factor to mix two masks, and already this mask is used as a global factor for the mix of two materials, snow and rocks. And I've got this nice mountain with snow. I use the same material for other mountains in the scene, as I said they are too similar, just have different random seeds. So, another way to create mountains in Blender, which I use, maybe not so often as the first one, but it's also deserved to show you. It's geometry nodes. Basically, Landscape add-on works on the same geometry node system in Blender, but we can create our own geometry nodes for this. And in some cases, it's even simpler, you know. So I add a new plane and open GeoNodes here. Press new and let's take a look at how to make mountains using a geometry node. Essentially, everything that we need is set position node and add this one to the line. Also we need subdivide mesh node before set position. Because we need more density topology, now it's the default plane and I would maybe subdivide this plane maybe 6 times. So, to make mountains we need noise texture, and use this noise in the set position, not in offset. But it doesn't work correctly because again we need only z-axis. To do this I add a combine XYZ node between noise and set position, and I need z-axis. Also, I add a math node after noise texture with multiply. And that's it. This simple combination of geometry nodes allow us to create landscapes, terrains and mountains. Almost all settings in this noise texture. Here, for example, scale to control noise size, value in math node works to increase all these noise settings. Maybe let's subdivide mesh one more time. Yeah, now it looks better. So, another settings in noise like noise details, which brings more details, small details, the same that we saw in the landscape add-on. Also, it's possible to change from 3D to 4D. It will work like a random seed in the landscape add-on. So maybe change to something like this. Yeah, I would rather prefer to add a color ramp after the noise texture, and use this color ramp we can select the range of the noise texture to make mountains and flat ground or maybe water surface. Here we can control how tall the mountain will be. And here we can control the general landscape surface. Maybe even change to B-spline to make this transition between mountains and ground smoother. Also scale here to create what you need depending on your goals. So I guess I leave it like this one. I think it's clear how it works, and just a couple of nodes in geometry nodes may help to create mountains. Sometimes this way works better than the landscape add-on because much faster since it's just a couple of nodes. Alright, the second way of creating mountains in Blender is more creative, and I use this way when I need to strictly follow the sketch because you have to understand that landscape add-on or geometry nodes it's generator, and using this way we have to rely on how the program does it, but sometimes we have tasks to create something special. In this case, I prefer to use the landscape add-on just for the start mesh with default settings. Just subdivide it to have more density on the mesh. Convert it to mesh, and I'm going to use Sculpting in Blender to make mountains. So I can use grab brush to make the necessary form of the mountains, and then using some clay brush I can continue forming the shape. It's also pretty well fit for sculpting some rock forms, fill brush but with constant fall-off. This brush creates a rough shape and allows us to add some details of rough mountains, cutting off some elements and making natural mountain form. But this only for the basic shape, because for the details I use rock alphas. To do this I need draw brush, and in the brush settings, texture. Here we can use any textures for sculpting. Press new, and I have an alpha set pack for rocks. I found them on ArtStation, and I'll put the link in the description if you need them. If I select some kind of like this, I can use this one for sculpting. Maybe even let's use some multi-resolution modifier. This one allows us to subdivide mesh and sculpt on this subdivided modifier to add more details from these alpha textures. So using different textures I can create the right shape of the mountain right in the Blender. This is a very good way to create something that is difficult to do with add-ons in Blender, and of course gives more flexibility in terms of the result, because it's basically modeling, and of course you can accurately create the necessary shape of the mountain. I would say it's even more creative approach, and it's better for some mountains and stones for the foreground than for the background, because spending a lot of time on the background mountains, maybe in some projects it's okay, but I guess it's still better for detail objects. Well, what other ways are there to use mountains in your artworks? Besides what I shown, we can use scans and models from other authors. I use Blender Kit very often for this, especially if you need to do a quick sketch or something that is really good. As you can see, there are many mountains of different sizes, from small to massive mountains. There are also real mountains scanned, which sometimes make it much easier to work on the project. So I just drag and drop the right model and it's already in the project. I leave the link to the Blender Kit in the description, highly recommend it, I use it almost every day. As you can see, there are some huge mountains. It's a real mountain scan, I guess. Yeah, it may not always be cool in texture, in some close-up view, but for the background and middle ground mountains, it's just quick to make a scene and it will look realistic. And finally, I know that many people will say my computer will explode from such a scene. You can use photos of mountains and just add them to the plane in the Blender. I've already shown this way in my videos. In short, all you need to do is find the necessary mountains photo, so it matches up with your scene light, and use this photo as a texture in the Blender. Also adding this texture in emission and disconnect shadows from the plane in the object settings if it's background mountains. It's necessary that just this plane doesn't create shadows in the main scene. By the way, this is a good way not only if your computer is weak, but because to find photos of mountains it's so easy just to use, for example, A.N.T elements or other photo stocks. Among millions of photos you can definitely find the right mountains for your project. In general, as you can see, creating realistic mountains is not so difficult. Even if you have no skills in modeling or sculpting, you can always use a free add-on in Blender for this and get a cool results. And I would say that sometimes this is faster than even looking for some ready mountains among models, as for me. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments or welcome to my Patreon. There you can answer questions in personal chat as well as get access to exclusive tutorials and materials. And by the way, the scene from this video you can find there.